Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Subcommittee will come to order. It's our privilege today to have before us the Acting Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Robert Lightfoot. We know that you have recently announced your retirement at the end of the month. Personally, want to thank you on behalf of the American people for your extraordinary service to the country, to the space program. You've done a magnificent job, and it's just been a real privilege to work with you. And I know Mr. Serrano, members of this subcommittee feel the same way. We've worked arm in arm to make sure that you've got the resources you need to finally begin to do everything that you've got on your plate, and we've got you headed in the right direction. And we are looking forward to your testimony today. But above all, thank you for your service to the country. As a token of our appreciation, we're having a statement printed in the Congressional Record noting your achievements, your long record of service to NASA and to the country. And we genuinely want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Robert, for all that you've done for the nation's space program. I'd be happy to recognize Mr. Serrano for any opening remarks he'd like to make.
Thank you, Chairman Culberson, and I would like to join you in welcoming NASA Acting Administrator Mr. Robert Lightfoot to the subcommittee. I was saddened to learn of your impending departure from the agency. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for your dedication and service to our nation. It means a lot to all of us. NASA is in charge of conducting civilian space activities in science and aeronautics research. I am a strong supporter of NASA, have always been, and believe that its program help America maintain itself as a world leader in space exploration and the scientific arena to develop those technologies. Not only do NASA's mission inspire so many people around the world, but they also help us innovate and address challenges that confront our nation. The budget blueprint for fiscal year 2019 requests $19 billion for NASA, which is an $844 million decrease from the 2018 enacted level. While NASA provides funding for a number of science and exploration activities, the budget proposal reduces funding for a number of important areas. I'm particularly concerned that although funding is continued for the education activities of NASA's Science Mission Directorate, this request zeroes out funding for 3 long-standing programs within NASA's Office of Education that help inspire the next generation of scientists. I strongly oppose the elimination of these programs. Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can work together in a bipartisan manner to preserve these programs that so greatly benefit the American people, just as we did for FY 2018 just a few weeks ago. I would further like to call attention to President Trump's inadequate request for Earth science, which is a cut of $136.8 million below fiscal year 2018. We need to place a high priority on NASA's Earth science research, and I look forward to discussing this topic further today. In addition, I'm concerned by the intent to eliminate the Wide Field Infrared Survey Telescope. This project received $150 million in 2018 and was ranked as the highest scientific priority space astrophysics mission by the 2010 Decadal Survey. We need to have a serious conversation on this project. I also look forward to hearing from Acting Administrator Lightfoot on NASA's long-term plans for human space exploration, which will require significant amounts of money for research and advanced communication systems. By the way, if you're short of people to send up, Chairman and I could give you a list of a couple of people. To grow in communication systems, entry, descent, and landing capabilities, and ways to protect astronaut health during long, deep space missions, among other things. All of these improvements will require massive amounts of money over a long period. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, as you very well know, I'm also a strong supporter of the Arecibo Observatory and believe that we must maintain strong support for its mission. NASA's FY 2019 budget request includes funding for NASA activities at the observatory, and I would like to hear more about this work. NASA helps drive scientific research and innovation in our nation. For almost 60 years now, our country has stood behind NASA by making investments to explore space and the cosmos, as well as to research our own planet and to develop cutting-edge aeronautics technologies. Thank you once again, Acting Administrator Lightfoot, for joining us today, and I look forward to discussing these important issues with you. The chairman surprised me by not making an opening statement, and I thought of not making one, but then I wouldn't be on the record.
No, we are, as you know, NASA is one of those things that we work together arm in arm on. Very grateful for your support, Joe. Everyone in the subcommittee is a strong supporter of the work that NASA does, and that reflects the will of the country. That is their unanimous support for the work that NASA does. And we have, working together, made sure that NASA had a record level of increase. We've got almost to $21 billion. We were committed to get you north of 20. We did so with the help of Chairman Shelby. He's been a terrific supporter. Mr. Aberholt, State of Alabama, State of Mississippi. We have strong support for NASA across the country. And comes with that, though, that increased funding comes increased responsibility. And we're confident that you and your new CFO are going to be good stewards of our constituents' hard-earned tax dollars. One of the things I do want to focus on, and I hope you'll mention in your testimony, and I'll talk about in my opening questions, is the 51-year roadmap that we enacted into the 2018 appropriations bill, beginning with a search for life on other worlds and moving on to identifying the nearest Earth-like planet and then launching humanity's first interstellar mission no later than the 100th anniversary of Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon. So we'll hope you'll talk about that. And the reason I didn't really mention much about the budget is that, as you know, the appropriations bill is what matters.
Right.
So that the
I know.
budget, we try not to get too worked up about the budget in this committee. That's just a recommendation of the Congress. The President proposes and the Congress will dispose.
Yes.
But we have your back, Administrator Lightfoot. We're delighted to have you here today and look forward to your testimony. To the extent you can summarize it, will be appreciated, and then we'll enter, of course, your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, for
Yes,
a
sir.
second, to go off a little bit here, but as you leave, I hope you spread the word around that this member of Congress, and I know the chairman agrees with me, I've been in public office 44 years, State Assembly and in Congress, and there is nothing more exciting to bring to a school than an astronaut. When you bring an astronaut to a school, it is total mayhem and ooh, I mean, it's just wonderful. And how did you stay up there and what did you do? And I remember one year we flew the Puerto Rican flag, and then 7 years later we flew the Dominican flag, and we had a presentation at a local college, and astronauts came, and astronauts are heroes and,
Yep.
and sheroes. And so please, on your way out the door, say, hey, let's keep working with the schools.
Yeah, there's no better way to ignite the spark of enthusiasm and excitement in a kid's heart than introducing them to an astronaut and the possibility that they might be one. And I'm very grateful for my letter of rejection as a astronaut. Thank you very much. I was proud to apply and to be rejected. I have it framed on my wall.
Was that last year?
Yeah, I did. I applied for the last class. And if we can't be an astronaut, we can be there to help you, make sure that they keep flying and that America's program is the best on Earth. So we welcome your testimony and your testimony in its entirety. If there is no objection, will be entered into the record. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much, Robert, for being with us today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify this morning. But before I begin, I do want to thank you, all of you, for the outstanding support with the 2018 budget recently enacted. That's going to enable us to do the kind of things you talked about, Mr. Chairman, and I think that for us, that lets us move forward pretty aggressively across our entire portfolio. As you said, you're going to get us upwards of $20 billion, and you did. So
I'd be
that's
grateful as part of your comments today if you'd mentioned how important it is that there be no rescissions when it comes to NASA, and how important all those things that we funded are.
Yeah, you get my support on that one, but I don't know if I control that. So, but I think it does continue to, the 19 budget that we've provided does continue to place NASA at the forefront of the global effort to advance humanity's future in space. You know, NASA is focused on our core exploration mission. In many ways, this mission returns value to the U.S., and I think through the mission, we're going to produce knowledge and discoveries, as you guys have talked about, strengthen our economy and security, deepen our partnerships internationally, and as just stated, really inspire the next generation. This is what we want to do to help provide the solutions here on Earth. The proposal this year really initiates what we call our exploration campaign. NASA is going to pursue the exploration and development of the moon and deep space by leading innovative new commercial and international partnerships and leveraging and advancing the work we've already been doing in low Earth orbit with our International Space Station. Our successful investment with the U.S. space industry in low Earth orbit allows us to focus our energies on farther horizons. As private companies continue their successful cargo missions to low Earth orbit, we'll once again launch astronauts from American soil, beginning with test flights this year. In low Earth orbit, the ISS, as I said, is our cornerstone for an integrated approach. We believe it's a perfect platform for us to understand the full potential of what we need to do while we still have it. We are proposing ending U.S. funding in 2024 for the ISS, and we've put money in to hopefully stimulate commercial energy in the low Earth orbit economy as we move forward. In the vicinity of the moon and its surface, the Space Launch System and Orion are our critical backbone elements of the future in deep space, and their momentum continues this year toward the first integrated launch of the system in fiscal year 2020 with a mission with crew in 2023. In 2019, in particular, we will have an important test for us. The Orion Launch Abort System will test, and that'll advance our understanding in safety critical areas that we're going to need when we actually fly crew. We'll also begin to build the in-space infrastructure for long-term exploration and development of the moon by delivering to lunar orbit a power and propulsion element. It's the foundation of what we call the Lunar Orbital Platform Gateway. This gateway will expand what humans can do in the lunar environment and provide opportunities to support those commercial and international missions to the surface, but also in the area around the moon with the technologies we need for further exploration. Our plan is going to draw on the interesting capabilities of industry and international partners, and we're going to develop progressively complex robotic missions to the surface of the moon with scientific and exploration objectives in advance of human return. In collaboration with our robust scientific activity across the NASA portfolio, these new lunar robotic missions will stretch the capability of industry and international partners while returning science and knowledge we can use for human missions. For the deep space domain, the technology will drive our exploration there. As you both stated, both human and robotic missions and help us solve the problems in space and on Earth. It lays the groundwork for our future missions. We have some technologies we need to work on, and we need to make sure we have those before we press further into space. And those technology investments will be focused on that, as you said, the longer-term application of what we want to do in deep space. Our incredible science portfolio will continue to increase the understanding of our planet and our place in the universe. We'll pursue civilization-level discoveries, such as whether or not there's life elsewhere in the universe. And I know that's a personal of interest to you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll scout for the knowledge to inform us where we want to take future human advancement. Our scientific platform activity includes a Mars rover, lander, and sample return missions, the Europa Clipper mission, which will further the search of life beyond Earth, diverse Earth science missions, and spacecraft to study the sun and how it influences the very nature of space. Powerful observatories, including the James Webb Space Telescope, will study other solar systems and their planets and peer back to the dawn of time through other galaxies. NASA's work has always strengthened our security and economy, and our ongoing research and testing of new aeronautics technologies is critical in these areas. As you know, we just announced the low-boom flight demonstrator contract award last week. It's an exciting time for us. It's going to help us lead the world in global aviation economy with increasing benefits worldwide. We believe commercial supersonic flight, unmanned aviation systems, and the next generation of aircraft are some of the critical focuses of this important program for our nation. NASA's mission will continue to inspire the next generation to pursue science, technology, engineering, and mathematics studies. We want them to join us on this journey of discovery. We want them with us. They need to be sitting in this chair one day, the kids that are out there today, and we need to inspire them as we go forward. And so we'll look at every opportunity to engage them. I do believe our budget this year places NASA once again at the forefront of the global effort to advance humanity's future in space and draws on our nation's great capacity for innovation and exploration to raise the bar of human potential and improve life across the globe. And on a personal note, in closing, I want to thank the committee for supporting me during this time of being acting administrator. It's been an interesting time, I will say, but it's been great to have such proponents of what we're doing work with us on a daily basis, and I always felt like you guys had great support for the nation's space program, and I was glad to just be the face of it for 15 months. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Administrator. We are each one of us keenly interested in making sure that the human spaceflight program stays on time, on track, and concerned, I know, about the slips in the SLS program. Wonder if you could, to talk to us about about why EM1 is slipping, what's on the critical path at this point, and you know, we've provided significant support for SLS to make sure it stays on track. We've made sure that you've got the additional mobile launcher that you're going to need for the exploration upper stage to be sure that SLS stays on track. What are some of the difficulties or problems that are causing the slippage in EM1? And what's the status of the European service module? That's a real source of concern, that critical piece is in the hands of somebody else that we're relying on.
Yeah, so as you know, SLS and Orion continue to make good progress. We moved the date, the targeted date to December of 2019, and we said we'd have 4 to 6 months of risk associated with that when we first changed that. Orion is on track, is doing fine. The European service module and the core stage are our two items that really pace each other on the critical path, depending on really what week you're at. Most of the challenges we're having are this is the first time we were building these pieces of hardware, and so the first time build, things pop up and occur.
What's popping up?
Well, just what I would call, so for European service module, for instance, valves that are provided by a company in the U.S., we're having trouble getting the valves to them. Some of the design challenges with some of the tanks that we had there. On the Space Launch System side, some of the welds we had a real struggle getting some of the welds to work to the strength that we thought we needed. And now the sections of the core stage, what we call the engine section, which is where all the shuttle, the RS-25s are going to be mounted in the bottom. Just the physical, the physical amount of work inside that engine section, you just don't have enough room to get everybody in there that needs to be working at the same time. So we're learning some of those kind of what I call process flow situations there. The testing so far of the hardware that we've taken forward, though, for structural testing has worked out fine. We've had really good results so far, so we're pretty confident.
We're building 2 of them?
Well, we're building the structural articles. We're building the ones for the first launch, and we've already started processing even for EM2. I think it's very important that everybody remembers we're not just building one launch vehicle. We're building a program so that we can launch these once a year to bring these elements that we need to deep space.
And what's your best estimate of the launch of EM1?
Of EM1? We're still targeting, like I said, we're still working to the December 19. I think we've lost a couple of months just that we're trying to get back. I don't know if we will, honestly. So I think that's where we are, but we're still within the 4 to 6 months that we talked about before.
And that's a result primarily of problems with the service module?
And the core stage.
And the core stage.
Those two I can tell you we meet quarterly.
Right.
Or I meet quarterly with them. They get a lot more meetings with other people, but I meet with them quarterly, and those two battle back and forth.
I'd heard that one of the problems with the core stage is difficulties with the solid rocket engines, the exhaust. Is there any problem with the heat or the exhaust produced by the solid rocket motors and causing any damage or problem to the rocket nozzles on the liquid fuel center stage?
Yeah. So these to give you to kind of summarize where that one is, we don't think we think we're going to get past that issue. We're not that worried. That's not a driver. Well, the issue is that if you go back to the shuttle program, the main engines, which are the version of the RS-25 that we're flying now, Space Shuttle main engines, they were located I mean, if you think height-wise, they were much higher than the exhaust of the boosters. On SLS, they're pretty close to each other from a height perspective. So when the engines start, you get heating, and then when the boosters start, you get heating. So the question is, will the heating affect the main engines differently than what we saw under the shuttle program? So that's what we're working on. I don't think that's gonna be a showstopper at all.
Okay. What are some of the other problems with the core stage?
Like I said, getting the welds done on the tanks to make sure they got the right strength.
That was solved with the stir.
It is, but it's also, well, yes, we went with friction stir welding on this, but if you remember, we had a challenge with that to start with. So getting through those first builds of that were important. We've gotten those through now, right? So it's kind of behind us, but it's one of the reasons that we had a delay. We've done our proof test on some of the tanks, so we're comfortable with that. The other big piece right now is what I said, the engine section, which is the part where the tanks mount into a structural piece, and the 4 liquid engines sit in the RS-25 sit in the bottom there. The space to work inside of there is limited, so the amount of work we have to do in there, I can't put as many people in there as I would normally do.
So I heard you mention you think you've already had a few months slip, so you're already looking at early 2020
Yeah.
for the first launch.
I think that's when it'll be. Right now, that's what I believe, but we'll see, because we're also trying to work to see if we can pull that back. I just don't know if we can.
Okay. What when will you have launch cost estimates available for SLS? I've heard estimates ranging from 500 million to $1 billion for each launch, and that's certainly not sustainable, and something I know that the subcommittee, all of us would like to see you do a better cadence, and the more you launch, the more you bring that cost down.
Right. I think right now, we're still sticking with the same number that we showed last year because we haven't gotten through the first builds of all these yet.
Which is?
And it was 0.9 to 1.2 billion. We know it's going to come down. We just don't know what that is yet. We've got several initiatives in place for affordability. Affordability initiatives. We're working with each contractor on how do you get more. Absolutely. We know it's crucial. And I think those are the initiatives we have in place. But once we get through the first builds, we'll have a better feel for what it's going to take from a sustaining perspective. But that's where we are today. We don't want to change that number yet till we get the first builds done.
I'm confident the private sector, commercial, is going to help also drive down that cost.
I think so.
Competition's always a good thing.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Serrano.
Thank you. I also support the chairman going up in space, but only with the condition that he allows me to be the one that wakes him up with one of my opening statements, and that'll guarantee that he'll oversleep, but anyway. Mr. Lightfoot, as you have... I tried it as a career and it didn't work, so it's, why should it work here, you know?
Want us to do the ba-dum-bum?
Yes, yes. Mr. Lightfoot, as you have noted in your testimony, the administration is proposing significant funding over many years for a lunar orbital platform gateway to enable missions on and around the moon. In an era of challenging federal budgets and competing priorities, what are the best arguments for how this is worthy of significant public investment? How will this program differ from the work of the Apollo program 50 years ago? Is there a case to be made that this is a new endeavor that pushes the envelope of space exploration, or is this mostly a repeat of the activities of the Apollo program?
Yes, sir. I actually believe this is a new endeavor. We're going to stay. We're going on a sustainable approach, and we're also not just going to the moon. We're building systems that allow us to use those systems to even go on to Mars eventually is what we're doing. And I think what I see is the value of this endeavor is so many things. The engagement of our industrial base in this country in a new endeavor is big. Our international partner relationship and including them is going to be big. But the biggest thing I think you're going to get out of this is a whole new leadership and inspiration piece that we bring to the next generation. If you go back to Apollo, that's one thing I would say is going to be like Apollo. If you go back to Apollo and you look at engineering schools before we tried to do what we did, the ripple effect of doing Apollo through our culture and what it did from an educational perspective, we expect the same thing. And I think that's what great nations do, is they take these challenges and it brings other people along with them, and I think that's why it's worth it.
This object, what do we call it? What's going to go around the moon?
The gateway. The lunar orbiting platform, or gateway.
Okay. It will stay there for how long?
We think as long as we can keep it there. Several years. It'll be reused. It will not have humans on it all the time. It'll just be a platform that we can go to and from Earth to there. And our objective, our thought is that we'll use landers, and whether they're scientific or human, and they can go to and from the moon to the platform. We can reload the landers. We can do everything we want to do from the platform. The other advantage to the platform with the propulsion system we're building is you can move it around. And unlike space station, which has a certain inclination, you know, we can't change its inclination today. Around the moon, you can do stuff on the backside of the moon. You can get in different areas with the propulsion system that we've got. And it allows you to actually do science, study of the sun, other kind of science you can do that's not just lunar from this, because you're not blocked by the Earth, things we can't do on space station today. So we had a conference in Denver about a month ago, and we had 74, 75 strong proposals of things you could do that, yes, lunar science, but also other kind of sciences you can do from
Well, that was my next question. You know, we always know that we learn more every day, but what do you think will come out of this, or you expect to come out of this, that we didn't learn before?
Oh, well, I think if we go for the long duration here, we're going to talk about learning what we can do with this. The goal would be with these landers is the first ones will go almost as our scouts to start to tell us where to go look for volatiles in the regolith, the surface of the moon. We'll take another set to go back and see, can we prospect that? It'll be like a step up one version. We'll start trying to prospect to see if, let's say there's water ice there. Can we pull that ice out, and can we do something with it? Because it could become propellant, right, for us to use in the future, or a source of oxygen if we need it in the future. And then ultimately that would lead to human landings, and we would go there in a more sustainable way. But all of those things we're doing are things we're going to need to do if we ever go to Mars, right? These are the kind of systems we're going to have to build. It's different at the moon, no doubt, because there's no atmosphere, but there's still the systems and life support systems and things we'll have to work on. So I think that's just at the moon. But the platform itself is going to have the ability to put instruments on it, just like we do on the space station, to look out from an astrophysics perspective, or look at the sun from a heliophysics perspective when you're not blocked by the Earth.
Right. One more question here, Mr. Chairman. The Trump administration is proposing a significant cut to NASA's STEM education efforts, including the complete elimination of the Space Grant Program and the Minority University Research and Education Program. To what extent could the elimination of these programs hurt the nation's ability to produce impressive numbers of talented space scientists, and to what extent would it compromise NASA's ability to continue to attract a talented future workforce?
Yeah, so if you remember last year we talked about this. We had proposed the cancellation of the education program then, and in the 18 approach it was put back in. So we are ready to execute as we were asked to do in 2018. But what we also did last year is we did a study on how to be more effective with our STEM engagement, and you guys are going to see soon an organizational change that comes up, and instead of the Office of Education, we're going to call it the Next Gen STEM Office, Next Generation STEM, so that we're focused on that next generation with the Education Office we have. In this proposal, we proposed, again, the cancellation of it, and our focus is going to be more on what can we do through the missions, what can we do through International Space Station downlinks and things like that to astronauts in schools. That's going to be how we're going to try to inspire the next generation as we go forward. We think we've got mission, I would call it mission excitement, that gets people inspired again to go. Our missions and our centers actually fund a lot of internships. If you look at the amount of internships NASA does each year, we do about 1,400, and over 1,000 of those are not funded by the Office of Education. They're funded by the missions and the centers themselves. So we think we still have a good footprint to be able to inspire and bring in the next generation.
You know, Mr. Chairman, in closing, one of the not well-kept secrets is that years ago, NASA went to the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez campus. Mayagüez happens to be the place where I was born. And since then, there's been a very serious presence of people graduating from that campus and then going on to NASA. So
We
it
still
certainly
recruit
would
heavily
make
there.
both of us very happy if that relationship continues.
Yeah, we still recruit heavily, and I think we've got a CubeSat coming from one of the universities in Puerto
right.
Rico flying here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Strong support for that education program, whether it be New York, Pennsylvania, Washington State, Alabama, Mississippi, all over the country. So we're glad you're keeping it intact. Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Lightfoot, it's great to see you again. Congratulations on your retirement. Thank you for your leadership at NASA and your decades of service. It doesn't go unnoticed, and it's very appreciated.
Thank you, sir.
So I'll just jump straight into it. My first question is, could you please describe how the fixed price programs have encouraged innovation while controlling costs, specifically referencing the COTS program?
Yeah, so what we've seen is that through the fixed price process is we've relinquished a little bit of what I would call our control, right? But we've also learned from those programs. Those folks have come in with new ideas and new ways to approach what they're doing for us from a delivery of hardware. So we're learning from them, but we're also providing them feedback in areas that we have enough insight and oversight in the process to allow us to actually say, okay, no, that won't work. But they've also challenged us on our requirements, and so I've seen learning going both ways, and I think that's what's been the most positive thing about it to me is we're learning from some of the what I would call different suppliers than we've had in the past, and they're not, I would say they're not constrained by our history in some ways, but we're also able to articulate why our history is what it is and where we can do that. So we've struck a pretty good balance there. It's been interesting to see both sides learn from each other.
I assume NASA found it essential to pursue other ways of having, because with the limitation of funds and NASA's flat and stable budget, you had to, and we want to focus on deep space and going further and deeper. That this was just a natural ascension for commercial companies to come into low Earth orbit.
Yeah, we think the public-private partnership process is working pretty well for us and think we can extend it, but we still have to make sure we have the right level of oversight from our perspective going forward. So,
with President Trump signing the 2017 Transitional Authorization NASA Act, has the attitudes or the morale in NASA, how would you gauge that as the administrator? Because I kind of feel like the 7 years I've been involved in NASA, it seems like when there was no mission, no roadmap, it was like, where are we going? It just didn't seem like there was a lot of motivation. And can you tell me now that there is a roadmap, we're putting funding, into the systems, what your thoughts are? What are you seeing?
yeah, I think what I've seen probably the biggest impact on that, Congressman, is that the National Space Council and the Vice President's engagement, obviously the President's engagement, but the Vice President's engagement has been tremendous boost to our teams. He's been to 4 of our centers, or 3 of our centers, but 1 of them twice since he's been on board. He gave us the action, NASA the action to do the 45-day study on the lunar plans, and that's what's codified in this budget. So I would say historically, not even in the last 7 years, but my experience in my 29 years is we do a lot of those kind of studies and plans and they end up on a shelf. Right. These guys actually put it in the budget. And so that's a pretty exciting thing for us, and our teams are from a human spaceflight side, they're rallying around in a big way. The Aeronautics guys are excited because they've got first big X-plane they've had in a while. So I think the morale's pretty good and people are pretty focused on what we want to go do. I think what this plan did from the administration was really, which we provided them and they supported with some, with their own tweaks along the way, was it really provided us this kind of roadmap for what we want to do in the decade of the 2020s. That was probably, we kind of knew what we want to do in the 30s is get to Mars. And we knew what we're doing now with the International Space Station. This really filled a gap for us in terms of defining the mission set that we need to do in the 2020s. And so I think people are excited about what we're doing.
Yeah, that's good. That's fantastic. I've been reading in the news this week where there seems to be a lot of articles talking about there's probably going to be some form of war in space in the future. And we're constantly struggling, and having a defense background, former being on the Armed Services Committee, and career reservist and guardsman, we know there's near peer competitors are challenging us, Russia, China, others. Maybe not in the civilian space domain, even though we do partner with Russia a lot and on the International Space Station. Going back to the history of NASA, was very vulnerable in theft of secrets compared to other military and scientific agencies. There was 2015 Langley, Chinese, a Chinese, someone was sponsored that, and he had access to a laptop. There was the network hacking that we thought the Russians and Chinese were involved in. And so this is, the absolute theft of our information on satellites, rocket engines, our space systems. And, we spend billions of dollars. We spend, the appropriation, billions of dollars, and we're putting all this money, all the work into it, the brain energy, and then they just come in and steal this stuff. And what we've noticed previously under the prior administrator was that there seemed to be a lax attitude at some point. Can you tell me, or have we cracked down on that? Is the scientists and the NASA employees, are they taking this seriously? That we can't let laptops walk out of the buildings in Ames or Langley and places like that.
Yeah, I think we've had a pretty good campaign internal to the agency about those threats and about the protection of that. When the situation occurred in 2015, we brought in NAPA to do an assessment for us on our Foreign National Access Program, for instance. And we learned a lot from that, and we're still implementing some of those recommendations. It was like it was kind of sequential. You couldn't do them all at once. So you had to get this done, then you could do that. And we're about done meeting all those, and we've met all the milestones required. In the cyber world, our teams are working really hard. Our CIO, we actually increased the budget for that this year in our 2019 submit. to try to help make sure we've got all the tools in place we need to know when when we have the potential releases. The challenge, honestly, for us is culturally. In 1958, we were stood up as a wide open, share everything organization. If you read the Space Act, it's supposed to be civilian and share. And so we've had a lot of progress in that area because we had to, right? When 1958, nobody thought this was the kind of thing we'd be dealing with. But yeah, we've had a lot of progress there, and I think I think our CIO is making great progress. I've also stood up what's called an enterprise protection program inside the agency, which looks at ground systems, the integration of ground systems, flight systems, and the potential threats to those, so that we have a way of managing, and we work with other government agencies to understand the threats that we might not know because we're a civilian agency, but we work very closely with other agencies to understand threats to our systems here on the ground, but also in space and in the air.
Thank you, Administrator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I hope you're also complying with the language we've got in our bill that requires NASA to ensure that any telecommunications, information technology systems that you guys purchase, that you have to certify, have the FBI.
Yes, and we got that with we also have that with the visits that we have with potential visits with the Chinese. We have the 30-day requirement where we have to go through the FBI, all those things. We're still confirming.
Keeping the Chinese out of our business as best we can. Thank you. Mr. Kilmer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being with us. I want to start by asking about, we've been looking at efforts to sort of further promote the development of the commercial space industry. And we've heard that space situational awareness is a critical step to safe and effective operations in space. And I know that NASA currently works with the U.S. Air Force on space situational awareness, providing services for robotic and human spaceflight missions and on research associated with better understanding space debris. Given that NASA operates, dozens of U.S. government spacecraft in Earth orbit, could you speak about how essential that established relationship is to your successful operations in orbit?
Yeah, so we use the Air Force to help us with our warnings that we need associated with things that could be getting close to our spacecraft, so that we can do what we need to do from a maneuvering perspective. We're dependent on that. As you know, there's a lot of debris up there, and there's a lot of things we have to pay attention to, but we routinely get warnings, and we routinely move the things we need to move around to avoid them. And that's just it. I think overall the orbital debris policy part of this is something that the U.S. We've already talked to the Space Council about. This would be a good thing for the Space Council to take up, so that everybody knows what swim lane they're in. Because everybody, not just us, Commerce, Transportation, and the DoD, we all have an interest in this, and I think that's something right now that's pretty clean, and we're trying to make sure it stays that way in terms of those relationships.
I guess I wanted to get at the particular value of the kind of the established relationship with the Air Force on this front. I
mean, it's critical to us. So I don't know how else to say it any other than that. Is that they're very we're quite a bit of partners in there. Our teams work with their teams daily.
Okay.
Based on the emails I get daily, is what I would tell you.
I want to ask another issue that kind of piggybacks on that. And, I'm from Washington State. We've actually seen amazing emergence of private industry on this front, everything from Blue Origin and Spaceflight and SpaceX and Aerojet and Sistema and all of these companies. Some get significant NASA support, but also inject a whole bunch of private funds into advancing the mission. At the same time, we've got some universities, UW, Washington State University, that also do some outstanding research and education programs that some of which are funded by NASA and, again, sort of advance the mission. We've been thinking in our office about sort of that intersection, that interface between the private sector and public educational institutions and NASA. And in the Pacific Northwest and in some other states too, like Colorado, where there's no permanent mission directorate. I think there's a concern about lost opportunities, sort of to advance the U.S. mission in space. So I guess I was looking for a little bit of advice. Maybe this is an overly parochial question, but it's not intended to be. So how can states that don't have a permanent mission directorate work more closely with NASA to create those synergies and enhance those ties between the private sector and NASA?
Yeah, so I think what we can do, and I'd like to offer to provide it to you, is we have several offices that people can reach into, emerging space kind of activities that they can do, but not just space. So we'll get that to you for the record, so you can provide it to your constituents, whatever. Hopefully they'll come to us. We have several ways that they can get to us to help with our missions. We meet with industry pretty routinely. We have several different ways, whether it's small business, hub zone, even large industry, to try to show what we're doing. Next week I'm at Colorado Springs for the Space Symposium. We're having industry come in. I'm meeting with Blue, for instance, about what our big roadmaps are and see where they think they can come in. That's the way that we do it, through these space offices that we have. So I'll get you that information and make sure you have that. So if somebody asks you about it, you can tell them where they can reach out and get in touch with us. I think we have a pretty good program for not only working with universities, but also any businesses that want to come, and we want them to come. We need the help. We got a large task in front of us with this exploration campaign.
Yeah, terrific. I appreciate that, and I think even our local economic development leadership is very interested in how do we further foster this?
Yeah, and we have, by the way, several of the local economic development for areas, they come see us quite often, right? They come in and we meet with them and say, this is what we're doing, and they take that back. So we're also open to those kind of discussions as well.
Super. Thank you. I know my time's up. I yield back, Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Minister Lightfoot, welcome. It's a bittersweet day because pleased to have you here today in Congress, but it's sad to see you retire, and we appreciate your service, as I've mentioned before. But as I've also mentioned, I know you got a bright career ahead of you and the next chapter of your life. I have a feeling that you won't be going to a retirement home anytime soon. So, especially knowing that you and I are about the same age. So, but as I've mentioned before, you and I share the same first name. Our wives share the same first name. But also, we share a desire to see NASA remain a healthy and bold agency, not only for this nation, but as a leader for the world in human achievement in the sciences and also in exploration. I want to explore a couple of topics with you, so I've got a couple of questions as we move forward. Like one of your predecessors, someone I think we probably both greatly respect, Mike Griffin, I think we should continue to explore innovative ways to let companies compete for business in terms of letting public funds and private funds work together faster on appropriate projects. What concerns many of us, at least at times, is the desire of some persons to make it an all or nothing for either of these parties. And that leads to some inaccurate attacks on our government programs and some exaggerated claims for private sector efforts which have not been fully demonstrated. Would it be correct to say that the SLS program, of course the Space Launch System, is very close to the $9.7 billion development price that was carefully negotiated back in 2011 between NASA and the prime contractors?
I believe we are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Also, is it correct to say that the capability of a rocket to take large, heavy payloads to space and insert those payloads often has to do with whether it's vertically integrated as opposed to integrated in a horizontal position?
That is a part of it. You can do things in a vertical integration that you can't do in horizontal, but you can still take a lot of payloads from a horizontal perspective as well. The big ones definitely is easier from a vertical perspective, though.
The SLS would be vertical, right? Mm-hmm. Vertically integrated.
Yes, sir.
Has any of the individual private sector launch companies invested building their own vertical integration infrastructure? Or are they expecting the government to build those facilities for each of the companies?
I'm not aware either way, honestly. I'm trying to think if I've seen proposals, but I don't know if they've invested in any of that yet from that standpoint.
You're not aware they've invested?
No.
Okay. My understanding is that the SLS, even if its first version carries 70 to 90 metric tons to orbit, would it be safe to say that it would be difficult for other heavy class rockets to carry more than 10 metric tons to orbit as long as they remain integrated in a horizontal position?
Can I get you? Can I get that data back without trying to do it off the top of my head?
Okay.
We can get you the comparison
Okay.
from that standpoint. I do want to say the big thing about the SLS is it's human rated. It's being designed as being human rated from day one, and that does bring some other dynamics to the build that aren't on some of the other vehicles that are being built.
Well, I think it's clear that SLS remains a valuable national asset for a couple of decades, we of course we see the companies working to increase their payload capacity. As you know, the shuttle had a very large payload, and my understanding is that you could fit a school bus in the payload. To construct the International Space Station, it would have taken many dozens of launches of rockets that we now use to take the cargo to the station, and that would, of course, been very costly. Can you comment on the significant length and circumference of the SLS fairing and how it makes SLS relevant both to government missions and for partnerships with commercial launch vehicles?
Yeah, I think the advantage to the large size, the large diameter that we have for SLS is that if you look at a mission like James Webb that we have today, a lot of the construction and design is associated with folding everything up so that it fits inside the fairing, right? If you have the Ariane, yeah, or whatever launch vehicle you've got, which is smaller than what we're talking about here. Don't make me do that off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman. So there, I don't want to do that one either. I'll get you the information exactly because we've got different versions we're looking at, so I don't want to ping it. But I think the big challenge there is you can change your spacecraft design. So often we talk about mass, we worry about mass, how hard it is to get mass. Volume is just as important. If you have a large volume and you can actually not have to fold things up. There's mechanisms you don't have to deal with that can fail when you get on orbit. That to me is the big value. Plus if you can do a big piece, you can do all your integration testing on the ground. It's all integrated on the ground instead of putting it together in space. Now, I don't want to say, we put the space station together piece by piece. It took several missions, just like you said, to get it to that point. And we had to deal with a lot of integration challenges, making sure the parts were going to work when we got up there. If you can put them all together in one piece and throw it one time, that's a huge advantage. And I think the other advantage SLS has is we can actually in what we call the trunk, the area behind the crew module, you can actually take hardware. You can take the crew and the hardware at the same time, so that if you have anything you have to deal with, you've got people there to work on it. So that's some of the bigger pieces. But the big one to me, the big qualifier is we're building it human rated to start with, and so it can take crew and cargo.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I think my time's up. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator, for your service and for being here today. My district in Queens, New York, is between LaGuardia and JFK airports. Aircraft noise pollution is consistently one of the top concerns for my constituents. We've met with NASA. I know that NASA is investing in air traffic management operations, which would limit the effect of noise, particularly in communities around airports. We also know that NASA has been working on developments in terms of potentially quieter engines as well. The Aerospace Operations and Safety Program was cut by almost a quarter. What are you doing, or what can be done to address airplane noise, and what kind of commitment can we get that this proposed reduction won't affect this important flight noise research?
Yeah, so we think we've still have a really good plan in place for that. The things we're doing, we believe our job is the research and technology, and working with our partners at the FAA is how do we reduce noise, because that's one of the largest, as you know, challenges with the infrastructure we have, and it actually limits our capacity in the airspace, right, for what we can do. So there's several things we're working on that start with, to your point, immediate things that we can do with the current air systems we have. So that's what the teams are working on. But the bigger things we're working on that I think are important are things like fairings in front of the landing gear. Landing gear are actually one of the loudest noise generators that you have. So we're building special special fairings that will cut that noise down. Or we're doing research on that. Can you put a fairing, almost a block in front of that, so they still perform their function, but to reduce the noise? We're looking at new airframe designs, other than today what we would call tube and wing, the standard airplane that everybody sees, a tube with two wings. We're looking at different designs that actually put engines on top so that they protect the noise. So the noise, the body of the aircraft actually protects the noise from the environment around. So that's the kind of things we're working on, the research we're working on, but it's very research. And then once we get to a point where we think the research is at the level where we can implement, then we begin to work with our industry and our FAA partners to say, okay, how are we going to do this going forward? So we have several areas of research we're trying to work on noise. It's always going to be something we work on because we think that's being environmentally responsive, right? That's what we do. So.
Thank you. I'm also deeply concerned that the budget request for NASA proposes to entirely eliminate NASA's education program. As a mom of two young boys in Queens, New York, and I've also met with young students, college and graduate students, and scientists who've talked about how they benefited and were inspired by NASA's education programs. We've had programs for many years throughout Queens and throughout New York City at colleges and for college and even younger students. Just last year, I took my kids to NASA's, one of their traveling exhibits. I have a picture right here. And they got to experience for the first time the amazing work that NASA does. At a time when the administration is proposing to grow NASA's space exploration capabilities, how can you justify cutting programs that will literally and directly impact this next generation of scientists?
Yeah, and when we did the balance of the entire budget for 19, our goal was to use the missions that we do. I mean, you showed a picture there of EVA, a spacesuit that we take out. We do those exhibits through the mission programs, the missions as well, not just through the Office of Education. And so we think we have an opportunity through our missions to still inspire folks as we go forward. So as I said earlier, the missions in the centers that we have throughout, they fund things like the internships is a great example of where we have 1,400, but roughly 1,000 of those are funded not by the Office of Education, but the others. So we still think we have things in place. I'm sure that'll be a point of debate as it was last year. And I understand the concerns, but when we had this is just the balance of the dollars that we made a decision on that.
Great. We, in New York City and specifically in Queens, New York, we have so many historically underrepresented communities and children, and any ways that we can partner together to, in the future, you and your team, to bring these programs into Queens, we would love to collaborate. Thank you. I yield back.
Remind everyone the ages of your sons.
Oh, 8 and 10.
Exactly the right age.
Perfect age. Yeah.
Thank you.
44 also to be inspired by space.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you very much for the recognition. Mr. Administrator, good to see you again. We enjoyed our visit when you came to Kentucky some time back and saw that exciting new space science curriculum and building at Morehead State University, turning out graduates with degrees in space exploration, which is phenomenal to me. A small mountain university that's doing making satellites and programming satellites, and they've got that dish there, which is one of your 9 or 12 tracking stations worldwide.
Yes, for the Space Communication Network. Yes, sir.
The only one that's not owned by NASA. So we're going to charge you rent for that.
Oh, okay. Lovely.
Anyway, congratulations on
Thank you.
what you're doing. When I was a younger guy, and I can speak for, I guess, most Americans in this regard, when I was a younger guy, the NASA name was gold and magic. It was an inspiration to people like me at that time. It got me back in school, enrolled in physics. Well, I wanted to be a part of the space program, but the university wanted me to study math. I wanted to shoot rockets right off. But it inspired people of my age to do some magic things. And NASA has done just that through all of the moon landing sequences that we went through. But with that landing on the moon, the first man, the magic quickly wore off. We had beat the Russians to the moon. We had successfully landed a man on the moon and brought him back. And we quickly moved to other ambitions in the country. And that first landing on the moon was the apex, if you will, of, I think, of that period of time. What I want to ask you is, how can we recapture that magic time, which meant so much to the advancement of science and manufacturing and everything else in this world? Miniaturization, electronics, and cyber everything. How can we recapture that magic time?
So for me, right, since I was an outcome of the Apollo generation, I wasn't in the Apollo generation. I was watching it on a black and white TV, I think when I was 6 or 7, right? I honestly believe we still have a magic time. I was part of building the International Space Station and part of launching space shuttles that put Hubble up, that put those up. Some of the greatest observatories we've done, and now we have this orbiting platform called the International Space Station. It's just amazing. That's had humans on it continuously for 18 years. So that means the kids that graduate from high school this year will never live a day in their life without someone living in space. So the challenge is not, the challenge to me is not that we don't have the magic. The challenge is educating people on what that magic is, to your point, right? And I think when we go back to the moon, and we go back not to just go to the moon by itself, but go to it in a sustainable fashion that we're proposing in this budget, you're going to inspire not only the NASA team, but you're going to inspire our international partners and our industry partners in this country to go along with this. And I think that's the thing. You know, it's been 50 years. Think how many people weren't there. I mean, I'm going to more meetings now when you ask who was there when we landed on the moon, where the arms are, there are less arms going up than it used to be. And I think that's what we want to do, is capture that imagination. That's a good next step on our way to Mars. The thing is, the thing about Apollo was we went and we stopped. Now we need to go and stay. And I think that's what we're proposing here. And also not just stay at the moon, but be thinking about going to Mars. And that's what this exploration campaign that we've been asked to put together by the administration does. I think that's going to get the people inspired and ready to stick with us.
Yeah, we didn't have another goal to take up after we reached the moon. We threw away all that experience and all that talent and all that manpower and training and equipment and understandings. All of that was more or less thrown in the trash heap. Now we're sort of having to start over again, which is a huge cost, but also a good deal of stupidity that we did not have a follow-up, follow-on. And I think one of the main reasons that time so captured everyone's imagination was it was a race with Russia, the Soviet Union, and the nation successfully transformed that competition into a real concrete and speeded up process. Can we recapture that kind of imagination without something like a race against the Soviets? Do we have to have something like that to make it appealing to us?
So I'm probably biased because I'm in this business. I don't think I need the race. I need more than 1 year at a time thinking, right? I need multi-decadal thinking for what we're trying to do. And to me, that's the difference, right? And I think what we've gotten from this administration this time is when the Vice President asked us to put together this 45-day study, it's roughly a 2-decade plan, right? And if we can stick with it, I think you're going to see that it's not just low Earth orbit where the International Space Station is. It's that plus the moon plus keeping an eye on Mars. And to your point, when we went to the moon, we won, and we didn't have anything else. We'd have that next thing there. Now I've still got Mars there. I've got several things there as the next piece. And so I think, to me, I think you know, in my opinion, I don't need the race, but I'm also part of the team. So I love what I get to do every day. I don't know the interest outside of my team. We're kind of buffered by the fun things we get to do every day to pursue this exploration journey. So I think the magic's there.
More power to you, and all of us want to be helpful in you and your success.
Yeah, and by the way, I did enjoy my visit to Kentucky. Ben Malfris is doing some amazing things there. Fascinating. They're going to fly a CubeSat on EM1, the first SLS. Moorhead is SLS had, and they showed me the CubeSat they're building. So it's pretty fascinating.
Thank you. They enjoyed your visit.
Yeah.
They were greatly excited.
Good folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Lightfoot, for being here today and for many years of service, and I congratulate you on your impending retirement. I also want to commend you on the progress you've made at NASA in bringing about really a new space age that positions our country as the leader in commercial space revolution. But you just touched on something that I want to go into, and you said I need multi-decadal thinking, and I think that makes good sense, and it fits so squarely with the way NASA has always worked. And I want to go into that because NASA has unparalleled knowledge and satellite engineering expertise that is virtually impossible to replicate in another agency. So I'm concerned about the deep proposed cuts to Earth and climate science in this NASA budget. It almost represents an abandonment of the wisdom of our scientific community. Our own science agencies, including NSF, NOAA, and USGS, came together with university researchers and experts across the country to agree on long-term priorities in the 2010 Astrophysics Decadal Survey and the 2017 Earth Science Decadal Survey, and published by the National Academies of Science. These decadal surveys are the roadmaps for future science research. They're agreed to across all the agencies, major research institutions, and experts in the field. They're designed to enable coordination and cooperation on large-scale and important science missions. And they're all about multi-decadal thinking. But instead of respecting the expertise behind the recommendations in the Earth Science and Astrophysics Decadal Surveys, the current administration is shelving our next flagship space telescope and canceling 4 critical Earth science missions that were highly prioritized in the 2010 and 2017 decadal surveys. Including one mission that's already operational and has been flying for over 3 years. And Chairman Rogers very wisely just mentioned the high cost involved in stopping and starting these missions, particularly when we're talking about decadal length types of missions. I want to go into that. NASA, more than any other agency, engages in these long-term missions. And the question is, how do abrupt deviations from these missions developed based on carefully constructed decadal surveys increase costs for taxpayers? How correct is what Chairman Rogers said?
So when we look at our science decadal that we have today that we just got, the 2017 one was just released, we're evaluating that now to see how it fits in our current set of portfolio missions. We still have well over 20 missions flying in Earth science, and we have 65 aircraft that we use for airborne science as well. We feel like we've got a good portfolio in Earth science. The focus for this budget simply was around exploration that I talked about a minute ago, from the human exploration with a mix of science in it. The astrophysics decadal, you're talking about WFIRST, which is the mission that we propose in canceling. That was not based on science or based on progress. That was based just on purely on the amount it was going to cost us to do that. And when we balance that across the entire budget that we have to keep, it became a budget discussion more than it did whether we're meeting the decadals or whether or not. So that was the difference. Obviously, in the 2018 budget, all of those Earth science missions and WFIRST were put back in. So we're continuing. We've been continuing on them because we proposed the same ones in the Earth Science Arena last year, except for RBI, which we canceled for performance reasons, not for the reasons of a budget proposal.
Well, W First is being cut, right?
We're proposing to cancel it in 2019, but we are working on it fully because it was funded in the 2018 appropriations.
Well, there's a question. How much time and money has already been invested in W First, for example?
About 320 million, and its estimated range right now is 3.2 to 3.9 billion.
And how much knowledge and monetary investment will be lost if W First is canceled?
That would be speculation on my part. I don't want to go there, but it's clearly we've spent 320 million today.
So the question is, how can NASA guarantee to American taxpayers that we will see the benefits of the time and money that have been invested already in W First?
Well, we clearly are working on instrument technology that we think can go forward into future missions, depending on how we go to capture the decadal science. You got to remember the decadal is about the science, not necessarily the mission. So we're trying to figure out if we can do the science in a different way than what we're doing it with this larger mission.
And is it just W First, or isn't it also PACE and Clario Pathfinder and Discover and OCO 3?
Yes, those are in the Earth science side. The other one's astrophysics. But we believe we've got missions today on orbit that give us data similar to what we would get out of those missions, and it becomes just a budget discussion around that as we go forward.
I'm out of time. I yield back.
Just to reinforce the subcommittee's agreement with where Mr. Cartwright's coming from, you know, since I became subcommittee chairman in fiscal year 15, we've included report language directing NASA to follow the recommendations of the decadal survey in each of the major study areas. And the budget, again, is just a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr.
We don't
Chairman.
get too worked up over the budget. Because they need to follow they will follow the appropriations.
In
bill.
that case, I will not be asking for a subpoena of the reasons for your rejection from NASA.
No worries. And we're going to have a hearing, we're tentatively shooting for May 9th on the astrophysics decadal and on the W First, Webb, looking at the next generation of space telescopes and that precise question. We should be thinking long-term and give NASA the freedom to plan more than 1 year at a time. And we'll be working on that in this year's CJS bill as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Jenkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to thank you for your leadership. The time we've had the opportunity to talk, I appreciate your passion. You know, having the right people at the right spot at the right time, and I know that this area is your dream job. So thank you for your leadership. I only understand about every fifth word you describe when you talk about, so I'm trying to catch up. Administrator, thank you for being here. Thinking about Chairman Rogers' very eloquent and appropriate reminiscing. You know, I'm from West Virginia. The only rockets I shot off were little Estes rockets growing up, but my district is the home of Homer Hickam. My district is the Rocket Boys. My district is October Sky. So just what you've been asked about previously, and I know it's going to be a little bit of piling on, and I want to associate myself with the comments and the questions you've been asked about the space grant and NASA EPSCoR programs and just the whole investment in education and STEM inspirational efforts. It is about your future, our future. It's about the kids of West Virginia or any state that are inspired to shoot higher, dream big. And so I'm like the others here, and I know it's somewhat repetitive. I just wanted to make sure you heard also from me as well a very deep concern about cutting and elimination and reductions in what I see as the potential focus of NASA and the education programs. So I know you've probably said it now multiple times, but I need to hear the reassurance again that you are going to continue and in what form and fashion to inspire education and research and STEM activities because this is your feeder system and we can't give up on our kids.
Yeah, and as I've said earlier, we're proposing canceling the education office, the Office of Education. for us, we're going to use our missions that we have through our mission directors to inspire the next generation. We have several educational activities we do there, whether it's the internships we do, some of the research programs we have through space technology and those kind of areas. That's the way we're going to try to fill that void. Admittedly, you know, that's going to be a concern, whether that can actually fill the void or not. I understand that completely going forward, but that's the way we've done it. And all I know is as long as we're getting appropriated the money, we will have an education office that executes what you guys have asked us to do.
Why don't you, since you've labeled it as a void and you've said very clearly you have a way to try to address the void, but whether or not it actually fills the void, describe for me in your words, rather than my words, what you see the void that is being created by the proposed elimination of this office is, and how you think and hope and desire, I think, that through your other approach that void will be filled. What is the void that you are creating by this budgetary action?
Yeah, so the education program we have today reaches people that we might not be able to reach if we're not paying attention to the specific area, MUREP, EPSCoR, Space Grant, the way those work today. But we think we have a way to reach to the same people using our mission, the mission activities we're doing. The advantage to the education program, honestly, is that it gives us 3 very specific areas to focus on. We'd like to make sure those are aligned with what we're trying to do as an agency going forward. And when you see the way we're reorganizing education today to this next-gen STEM organization, that would be, we'd look for more alignment even if we keep those programs, right? We'd look for changes inside those programs to make sure they're aligned with what we're trying to do so that when that workforce comes on board, they're with us. They're already part of our program.
What techniques and strategies under this new realignment do you envision putting in place under the new alignment to make sure that they have a conscious awareness that they have a role in their alignment to fill this void and to hold them accountable, so to speak, and to measure? You can only manage what you measure. So ways to make sure that through this new realignment that we don't get years down the road and said, well, you know, we had good intentions, but nobody was really watching the store and it got away from us.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to do, and again, we haven't executed this yet, but this would be if we didn't have the education budget. So we're looking at ways to do that, and again, that's proposed in 19. We're not doing this in 18 because we've got education money in 18. I'll be really clear about that.
Yes.
What we're doing is we're bringing in the mission directorates, human exploration, aeronautics, space technology, and science. We're bringing them in to articulate with our the team that works Next Gen STEM now. We'll have a small group that still does that, and they'll make sure that the work those 4 mission directors are doing is aligned. We use the missions to be the voices of that.
And final question, do you think we can, and I appreciate your emphasis, and we've all worked very hard, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, about the continuity for FY18, and yes, we are thinking ahead. Can you, again, reassure us that you know, while I'll certainly be fighting to continue the funding, but if I'm not successful and this heads in a different direction, that we have the appropriate, I guess, things in place to plan to make sure that no void has occurred. This, you know, adequate preparation for that day.
Yeah, I think we can bring you. We're glad to take that one and bring you back the plan and show you what we're talking about doing in the absence of an Office of Education. Right. Is that fair?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You ran out of questions? NASA's Earth Science Division works to develop a scientific understanding of the Earth and its responses to natural and human-induced changes by using innovative satellites that collect data on the Earth's surface and atmosphere. In short, this information ultimately helps protect American lives and infrastructure in the face of extreme weather events such as hurricanes. The President's budget is proposing a significant reduction to NASA Earth Science, including the cancellation of several key Earth science, Why is the administration proposing to reduce NASA's investment in Earth science? Shouldn't we place an equally high priority on the study of our own planet, particularly in light of last year's hurricanes that struck Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands? And by the way, we made an agreement yesterday that since climate change upsets some people in the House, I'm just referring to something is going on. And we'll leave it at that.
Well, I think we think we have a good portfolio of science missions. We think the budget is adequate, and if you look at the entire cycle, what we call the Brotherton cycle of what is the Earth system, all the different things, clouds, ice, water levels, color, ocean color, rainfall, all the different things we measure. We believe we have a measurement in all those areas that allows us to look at the Earth as a system and provide the data to folks that we need. So even when we made the selections we made on cutting the missions that we talked about in the 19 budget, they were based on our prioritization of what we needed to be able to still understand the Earth as a system. And so that's why we made the decisions we made within the budget allocations that we had. So I think we're comfortable. We still have the whole Earth system understood, not understood, but we have data that lets us to help us to understand that going forward. So we don't have a gap in those areas.
You know, the difficulty, believe it or not, in having you as a witness is that you have a lot of respect from this committee, a whole lot of respect. So we don't want to argue with you, you know, and in any way try to make your life difficult here before this committee. But again, to the people you talk back home in the home office, this is not the right time to be doing this. I mean, the hurricane season in the Caribbean hasn't started yet. It starts soon. We have no idea what will pile up on top of what already has happened, and then in Florida and other places. So this just, you might be surprised to find that this has a bipartisan look where people say, why are we cutting this at this time? Administrator, you're aware of my interest in the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico, a 1,000-foot wide telescope used for radio astronomy, atmospheric science, and radar astronomy. Could you explain for our audience some of the most important ways that NASA and the nation continue to benefit from utilizing this telescope, and why it is important to maintain the robust funding for this facility? And I'm hoping you agree with me, otherwise the question is a terrible question.
Yeah. Well, we use Arecibo for characterization of near-Earth objects. That's one of the things we do from a radio.
I'm sorry.
For near-Earth objects, we use it to understand. It's just part of the story. There's the radio, as you said, the radio astronomy that we get from Arecibo, and then we combine it with other assets we have across the nation to help identify what the shape, the size, the trajectory of these objects are. So I think NASA anticipates roughly about $4 million in 2019 that we would spend there to help with the characterization of these objects. So it's definitely a piece of our infrastructure that we use. So and we work closely with NSF on using it. So.
Do you know if the repairs have taken place after the hurricane? Because I know it took a hit also.
Yeah,
everything took a hit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do not know if they're completely done yet. I'd have to ask NSF for that one. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Serrano. Administrator, if I could, want to talk about commercial crew. We budgeted, the budget that the OMB proposes includes $173 million for commercial crew, but we see that the launch dates for Boeing and SpaceX have both slipped significantly, and the contractors have determined they're not going to be able to meet their original 2017 certification dates. Why are both programs delayed? And if you could describe NASA's process of overseeing these contracts, especially when it comes to crew safety.
Yeah, so we both companies are making great progress, and very similar to SLS and Orion, we're running into first-time builds and some of the challenges we're learning in test as we go forward. We still expect to see the first test flights at the end of this year.
End of 18.
Yes, from both the providers.
From both Boeing and
this would be the
SpaceX.
This would be the uncrewed flights.
Uncrewed.
So we're working through that now. As far as our assurance and our oversight there, our safety, engineering, and health and medical areas, what we call our technical authorities, are practicing a shared assurance program where they are sharing the validation of the requirements across both suppliers, and that's going fine. There's clearly going to be a bow wave at the end where we have to verify that. The actual design certification for these vehicles is actually approved to by the associate administrator. So Steve Jerzyk, who's going to be replacing me in that job going forward, will have that role to do the design certification review and approval. Flight to flight will be handled by the head of Human Exploration Mission Directorate, which is Bill Gerstenmaier now, of course.
Does a great job, by the way, and we let him know how much we all support him.
Yeah, you've supported him very well, and we're very
That's
appreciative of
right,
that.
yes.
But I think, so we've got a process in place that that allows us to still have the technical oversight that we need going forward. So it's good.
Now, the fact that the commercial crew launch dates have been slipping, when will there be any sort of a gap between the last seats on Soyuz and the ability of Boeing and SpaceX to get American astronauts to the space station?
Yeah, right now we don't show a gap, but we're planning as if we're looking at options. What can we do to not have a gap? Because we don't want a gap, and that could be, you may have seen recently, we asked Boeing to look at putting a third crew member and extending the stay of the first crewed flight, which was going to be shorter. That's one thing we've done. The other thing is we're working with our partners, our Russian partners, on can we have longer increments between, for crew members that go up, so that we don't have a situation where we cannot gap that. So we're working with all the partners and working all the options, but right now we still show margin to having the ability to get our crews there on the commercial entities.
So the commercial first uncrewed mission launch will be before the end of 18?
That's correct.
For both Boeing and SpaceX. When are they estimating that they'll have the first crewed launch?
Let me get that back to you. Let me just take that for record, because I'm focused on the uncrewed one right now in my head. So we'll get you that.
Don't try to get on a flight, huh?
We're going to make sure we get as many American astronauts into space as possible, as soon as possible. If you could, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Webb Space Telescope. We're going to come back to that on May 9th. I'm really concerned, all of us are, with the slip. And they've already missed, they're going to miss their fall 18 launch window. They had an earlier announced slip to May 19, and the revised launch date is now May 2020. The project's going to exceed its $8 billion cost cap. It's an extraordinary telescope, and I know a lot of technology that's not been tried before. The unfolding of that mirror and the solar shield is extraordinarily difficult. But I'm really concerned that there are a lot of simple and costly mistakes being made at this critical juncture, because I'm concerned that the contractor doesn't have the right mix of skill sets for the folks that are working on this project. Are you talk to us about the delays and where they're coming from, and does the contractor have the right skill set of employees on the project, and that as a result of the revised launch date and associated cost overruns, that a breach reporting requirement has been triggered, and could you comment on that?
Yeah, so we have triggered the breach, and we're working on the reports back to the Hill, and I think we've got till around the end of June to finish all that up. But we've notified the Hill that there will be a breach there. On schedule, we're still looking at cost. We think there will be, but we want to make sure we tell you one time from that standpoint. The challenges, honestly, Mr. Chairman, have been around the integration of the sun shield and the spacecraft. So think of two pieces, right? There's the telescope. That's the thing we've been testing. We tested it at Goddard. We tested it at Johnson. It
passed with flying colors.
It was in the chamber during Hurricane Harvey, for instance, and it never knew the hurricane hit.
And that's a great credit to the people at Johnson, who did an extraordinary job of protecting that telescope.
The Goddard teams that were there and the Johnson teams that were there continued testing during that whole time when they could. Anyway, so that's the telescope with all the instruments. It has now arrived at Northrop Grumman. We've got all the pieces at one time at Northrop. So Northrop's working the spacecraft and the sun shield. So some of the things that we've run into, honestly, are the sun shield deployment is taking, so during the course of doing integration and test, INT as we call it, we're going to deploy the sun shield and repackage it I think 3 times if I remember correctly. And what's happened is that's taken a lot longer on the ground than we thought it would. I mean, a lot longer, because my comparison is probably a bad one, is it to a parachute, right? You want to pack it right so that when it opens, it works, right? And so every time we open it, we got to go back and package it up. And so we had some trouble with some of the systems in that, some of the tensioning systems, and it's just costing us more time. We had some tears in the sun shield that we weren't anticipating. And these are the things you find when you get into integration and test. We've also had some workmanship challenges. We had some a heater that got more power applied to it than it should, so we had to replace that. And we really, the big challenge for us now is making sure that the integration and test flow, the whole flow from now till the time we ship to French Guiana, is actually a flow we can do today. So the standing review board that we have on all our projects, but we have one for James Webb, they looked at it and they kind of gave us a May of 2020 is when they thought would be a reasonable date. The other, what we did on top of that is we chartered an independent review board led by Tom Young, who is, I guess I would say, he does this for programs all the time, from overall reviews, a seasoned leader, in not only at NASA but in industry. And so that team is now looking to confirm whether we agree with those data or not. And so they're going to also look at the workforce. Do we have the right workforce? Do we have enough workforce? And so that's what we're trying to do. I think
you're going to report back to us on that.
You'll see that for sure. And I think for us the big challenge now is we got these instruments, as you said, passed with flying colors. We're ready to go. We don't want, I mean, as painful as it is, right? Because none of us are happy about this. I want to be really clear. None of us are happy about that, and we take all the accountability there is for what's happening. But we also want to make sure that we fly this thing and fly it well. I would rather fly a spacecraft that works, even if it's a little late, than one that we fly to rush to get into orbit. And so our science teams we need to make sure we respect their work they did to get their instruments ready. And so now we just got to work with our spacecraft vendor and get this thing put together the right way.
You should have that report, I hope, before May 9th when we have our astrophysics hearing.
Ooh, I don't think so. I think, when is it, June? Yeah, I think
4
they're,
to 5 weeks.
yeah.
Because we all need to look at that and talk about it. We'll have that, that's going to be a big part of the hearing. Thank you for the little extra time, gentlemen, but this is so important. The original launch date for Webb was, I think, we were just comparing notes, 2011?
That's when we re-baselined. I do not know when the original date was. I can get you that.
And, the cost, original estimate versus today, it's a magnificent instrument and something that's never been attempted before, and you're trying to fold it into the Ariane fairing, which we're going to solve with SLS, but we just can't let this happen again. And it reinforces the question Mr. Cartwright, all of us are asking about the importance of following the Cadle survey and the importance of this committee writing into our bill, find a way to let NASA plan more than a year at a time out into the future, and to try to free you from OMB as much as possible, and unleash you and let you be led by the scientists and engineers and great folks like yourself that can look far out into the future. Thanks for the extra time, gentlemen. I'm going to go to Mr. Kilmer.
Thanks, Chairman. I want to echo the concerns around the Office of Education and the Space Grant Program, and in doing that, it states there will be a small team at NASA headquarters and the mission directorates to take on the role that the Office of Education currently has to engage learners in NASA's work and to encourage educators, students, and the public to continue making their own discoveries. I'd like some clarity on that. How many people will be on that small team at NASA headquarters? How much funding will they receive to carry out that mission? And what are we looking at in terms of presence of employees at the mission directorates to work on that too?
Yeah, and as I told Mr. Jenkins, I would love to bring you guys to plan on what we're doing that more detailed than me in just 2 minutes. But what we're really looking for is a really small core group, and they're really integrators. They're not actually going to execute the education program, but they're going to integrate what we're doing from an education and public outreach perspective as an agency, but include the mission directors. Today, the Next Gen STEM office works with the mission directors, but it's a separate organization. Now we're talking about integrating, kind of aligning all those together. And more than happy to bring the story on what we would do in the event that we didn't have an appropriations for the Office of Education.
Thanks. The other thing I wanted to ask about with the time I've got left is the budget proposes to privatize the International Space Station. I'm concerned by what seems to be sort of a lack of planning and clarity on that transition, especially given that the budget proposes to spend $1 billion over the next 5 years, essentially to figure out what the plan is. But setting that concern aside, even if the transition to privatizing the space station is successful, when we think about the value of the space station, the cornerstone of our integrated approach to exploration, as your testimony states, that cornerstone is research. That's why the ISS was designated as a U.S. national lab. I'd just like your sense of, is NASA going to commit to a space-based national lab that lives beyond the current construct of the ISS and includes a pathway for federally funded researchers to use commercially provided space research platforms if ISS is privatized?
Yeah, so let me clarify one thing real quick. We're not necessarily talking about privatizing the ISS. What we've said is we're proposing eliminating U.S. government funds for that. There are other things other than the International Space Station. Several of the commercial companies have talked about a standalone platform. What we really want to move toward is a service-based, if you can think service, we want to buy a service in low Earth orbit. We know we'll still need to be in low Earth orbit, and I believe other people want to be in low Earth orbit. So we want to see what folks will bring back to us. And so for us, the reason we did this now was 2025 is in our budget horizon for us. And when we look at 2020, our next budget submit, we want to know whether we need to, is it really going to be 2025 or is it going to be 26? So you'll see us use this money to say, provide us back what's the plan, what's the business plan, who's your basis of research, right? We want the commercial industries to go out and say, I can get other researchers to come to my place. Now, it could be that they want to use the space station. They may want to take the space station from us and operate it, and that's fine too. But we're moving toward really we want to buy services in low Earth orbit. But part of that buying services is actually trying to spur a commercial industry in low Earth orbit. Today, low Earth orbit equals the International Space Station, and we pay for it. And if we can get a more broader base in that, I think you can have not just a national lab, I think you can have different labs that we just go to when we need to. That's our goal. We'll see what we get back in this process, but we still have time now while we got runway to work those issues since it's 2025 that we're talking about.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll yield back.
And we're also going to really bore in on that too, look carefully at it, because we want to make sure that NASA is keeping a foothold in the space station, like the idea of commercial, but don't know about handing it all over lock, stock, and barrel. Will you please represent the gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Roby?
Good morning.
How are you?
And let me first say, Administrator Lightfoot, I want to say thank you for your service to our country and your career working for and leading NASA to what it's become today. Your leadership and your expertise will certainly be missed. So we appreciate your time this morning. Under your vision and your management, our nation is on the cusp of returning humans back to deep space and going to further than we've ever been before. As Congress and this subcommittee continually has prioritized the funding and launch schedule of the Space Launch System, SLS, Orion, crew vehicle in their respective ground systems. You spoke earlier this morning, and again, I apologize, we've got a bunch of hearings going on at one time, but I understand. You spoke earlier this morning about the challenges of holding the 2019 launch date of EM1. So how can this subcommittee help you keep the progress and the work on track as we get closer and closer to this initial launch of SLS?
Well, I think the main thing is what you did in the 2018 budget, the stability that is offered to us when we see, as I said earlier, the committee has taken, in my opinion, a long-term view of what we're trying to do, not just a 1 year at a time, and that makes it planning much easier for us because we're working in a different mode because we know that we're going to get the support that we get. So I think that continued support is what we need.
And would you agree that NASA is prepared for scheduled mission launches of SLS continuously through the 2020s with EM2 and the first crewed mission in 2023?
Yeah, we're right now working a plan that would show at least one mission a year after EM2.
Okay, great. And so I thank you for your answers on this incredibly bright future that we have of sending missions and humans, again, further to further depths of deep space. And in showing NASA's commitment to deep space exploration. So can we talk about infrastructure and capabilities of propulsion for just a minute? Can you speak about the need to advance the nuclear thermal propulsion technology in order to have safe, efficient, and reliable propulsion for missions in the future?
Yeah, so we're working, there's a lot in that one. If you think about nuclear thermal propulsion, for instance, and the things it can do, if we can do that with low enriched uranium, right, instead of the higher enriched uranium, it becomes kind of a game changer for overall perspective. So our teams are working that now. We got that in the appropriations. I think there's $85 million in this year's approps for that. We're working with a couple of companies, BWXT, and we're working with the DOE on getting indemnification around that activity. We will develop a system that allow us to actually do the propulsion. The real question then becomes we also have to work on the cryogenic fluid management around that and the total system. So it's definitely a technology that we want to develop and see if it can actually be the game changer that we think it can be. And so we'll work the propulsion piece, but the bigger piece is going to be cryo fluid management and the entire package that all that gets put in. But it is definitely a future activity that we think is important.
I think you've already answered these questions, but do you feel it's necessary to commit to creating a multi-year plan now as we move closer to the 2020s for demonstration of this technology?
Yeah, I think you will see once we get the technology demonstrated, we need to look at where we could on-ramp it into our current architecture. Where would it become a kind of a piece that we would depend on, as opposed to one thing we've learned lately is you can't really depend on the technology now. You need to make sure you prove it out, at least get some of the risk mitigation done around that, and that's what we're going to do with the money that we've gotten this year's risk reduction around this technology. Then maybe you can talk about where does it inject in the architecture in the 2020s, right? Where would we put it in that part of the total architecture we're doing?
And I think you would agree that the money that's been appropriated above the president's request levels for SLS and Orion and the exploration ground systems, that it's helpful in the program's efforts to stay on schedule and maintain a proper workforce to get us to the initial operating capacity. And I guess building upon that, does this expanding funding provide by the appropriations allow for certain long lead BAS tests, standing up of suppliers in order to keep the program on track?
Yes, I think one of the big advantages to what we've gotten is this allowed us to do some risk reduction. That's very important for the first mission, but it's also allowed us to emphasize to everyone, we're not just building one mission, we're building multiple missions. And so we're already buying hardware for EM2, starting to look at just the pure material we need for EM3. So you can see that the teams are thinking longer term already, and there's a sense of urgency around that cadence of missions now, as opposed to just being focused on EM1. EM1's important, don't get me wrong, it's very important. But what we're really building here is a long-term program, and I think that's what's going to be important for us to stay focused on, and that's what the approach has allowed us to do.
Well, these are certainly exciting times, and it's a true privilege as a member of Congress to be a part of this subcommittee, to be a part of these historic things that are happening in our space programs. And so I just, again, want to thank you for your leadership, for NASA, for all the work that you do, and it's a real privilege to support everything that you have going on. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lightfoot, Chairman Rogers was talking a little bit about the competition with Russia way back when and all of that. But Russia's still a relevant subject with space because we rely on Russian Soyuz rockets to get astronauts to the International Space Station. And it's pursuant to a contract, and that contract expires next year, right? Now, obviously, Boeing and SpaceX have made great advances, but we only have one short year to get ready to transport our own American astronauts to the International Space Station. Will NASA be ready on time?
Well, I think we believe we will be. We've got margin today to the commercial crew providers being available, but we're also one thing we have is a great relationship with our Russian partners, and we're looking at other alternatives about potentially extending mission duration for the current missions that are there, so that we don't gap the ability to get there. I will tell you that regardless of what's going on in the rest of the world, our space cooperation with the Russians has been very good. It's a good team. We're ready to get our flights from U.S. soil, though. We're ready to get back to that, and I think our commercial providers are making great progress, and we're going to do our best to protect that gap going forward.
Right, and that's really the question. Are you satisfied and confident that we're not going to lose access to the space station because of an interruption like that?
I actually believe we'll be okay there, just because we've got several mitigation alternatives we can use.
What would the potential delays be in the certification process?
Well, I mean, both providers are going through their integration and test activities now, and you learn things when you do that. That's why we do the integration and test. So depending on what challenges they find as they go through that testing, that's something we're going to have to address and go forward. And our technical authority teams are watching those very closely, safety and engineering, to make sure we understand it.
And that's my next question. Does NASA currently have sufficient funding and personnel to conduct all necessary testing on that?
We believe so. The challenge is going to be if it comes all in at once. If all the the final certifications come in at once, we'll have a bow wave that we'll have to deal with. But our teams are kind of thinking about how they do that now. I was just in a meeting yesterday with all my safety directors, and they were talking about how to share resources to be able to address the bow wave that we know is going to come.
And from the commercial partners, do you have timetables, and has NASA critically evaluated their timetables?
Yes. Yeah, we look at it very routinely, actually.
Are you exploring any contingency measures just in case something goes wrong?
In terms of schedule, or, yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier. We're looking at ways can we extend stays that we have currently on the station with the seats that we do have left through the Soyuz program.
Well, good. Thank you for that, Administrator, and good luck
Thanks.
to you.
Thanks very much.
Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Administrator, I wanted to ask about the sequence of launches for EM1, 2, and for the Europa Clipper launch and the lander. I'm absolutely confident, based on the briefings I've had and the close attention I've paid to this, that the Clipper mission will be ready for launch in 22. Their best launch window is actually June of 22 for an arrival at Europa in 25 and 26. When will NASA, could you tell us about when EM1 will launch, and when are you planning for EM2 to launch? And that, of course, will be a crewed mission. And where do you intend to fly the Clipper? So right now, we're not picking which one goes first. It's going to be who's ready. And if Clipper is ready and from a risk standpoint we're willing to fly it on EM2, we would do that. I mean, but it's got to be a risk discussion around the readiness. The thing that's changed probably, Mr. Chairman, in our calculus, and this is just in the last couple of weeks since we got the appropriation, is the second mobile launcher. We know we can fly Clipper with an ICPS. ICPS for those those watching. Interim cryogenic propulsion stage, the upper stage. Sorry. You got to have somebody work on the names of these missions. There's have a contest or something. EM1, 2. Come on. How about the Chairman Culberson stage? Okay, all right. Well, anyway, we'll anyway. So inspire the imagination of all those. Something to inspire the imagination of all those young people out there. I think with the second mobile launcher, what we're allowed to do is actually keep the configuration that allows us to fly EM2, whatever it is, whether it's Clipper or Crew. So that second mobile launcher is really important. It enables that opportunity, because today what happens is after I fly EM1, the mobile launcher I have today, I would then have to start modifying for the exploration upper stage. It has to grow in length. Pocket considerably taller. Yes, it has to grow in length. So while I'm doing that modification, I can't fly. I'm just down, and there's a 33-month time period there. Now, knowing we're going to build the second mobile launcher, I can keep this mobile launcher in place, buy another interim cryogenic propulsion stage, ICPS, and still fly. And we've done the numbers, and we think Clipper can fly on the SLS with an interim cryogenic propulsion stage. On EM2? It could be EM2 if Clipper's ready, or if Orion's ready. We're really just going to see. We're not going to battle now over who goes. But I think we'll pay attention to that. We have both options, is what it boils down to. And so. But this committee's funding for was Chairman Shelby's strong support, the second mobile launch platform gives you that freedom and ensures that there will be no gap.
It allows us to have the ability to fly SLS when we're ready with whatever payload is ready to go. As long as the ICPS, obviously the value of the exploration upper stage is it gives us a lot more a lot more mass to orbit.
And we funded
the
that, too.
volume. Yes, and the volume. What the challenge was going to be was, wow, we just flew EM1 and now we can't fly again until the mobile launcher is modified with the exploration upper stage. Right, and so that took that off of it. So you're going to have to give us a little time, because that was just a couple weeks ago, right, that we found out we were getting that, and to be able to understand the flow. But what we're not doing is we're not saying EM2 is Orion. Its baseline is Orion. We know that. But if Clipper came in and was ready to go, we could easily fly that. It's not that big of a difference to us.
You gotta understand, we're all fired up to make sure the American space program is the greatest on Earth and that we return American astronauts on American-built rockets as fast as possible in a safe manner, of course.
Yes.
The mobile launch platform, I've heard some concern that it might be damaged or couldn't withstand the force for the launch of EM1. You look puzzled. I guess that's not a concern.
I'm not worried about that.
Good, that's not a
Teams are only because I know what we're doing to. We have areas that we're paying attention to from an analysis perspective, but we're beefing those up as we're ready to go.
It survived Saturn V, so you know.
Well, this is all new on there,
Only
so
stuff, but nevertheless,
yeah.
it's a pretty robust
But
structure.
all the structures and all the arms are there now, so we're getting pretty confident we're ready to go.
Most important thing is, as you said, is this gives you the freedom and the assurance that there won't be a gap between EM1 and 2 because you don't have a second platform that can handle the additional weight, height of the exploration upper stage.
That's correct.
So this ensures that the SLS launch system, Orion, will continue on track, on target, and it won't be slowed down as a result of lack of mobile launch platform.
Now we won't, and I want to be really clear though, we'll change the mission profile if we fly humans for the first time if we use the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. If EM2 flies that way, we would have to change the mission profile because we can't do what we could do if we had the exploration upper stage. But that still gets humans in orbit and it still allows us to check out all the systems that we wouldn't check out on EM1. So,
and again, December 19, probably going to slip into early.
I believe it's December 19 with that 4 to 6 months risk, and I think we've realized a couple of months of that risk now. Trying to get it back, I just don't know if we will or not.
So EM2, the manned mission, will launch when?
Let's see, the crewed mission for EM2 is, our commitment is 23, but that's with the 33-month bar between, because we're going to have to modify the mobile launcher.
But you're not going to have to do that anymore.
I know, but that was 2 weeks ago. Mr. Chairman, you got to give us a little while to do the analysis and go back and see how far we can pull that date back, and I think that's what the teams are looking at now.
See, that 2023 launch date's obviously going to move up quite a bit. You're going to be able to.
We think it should, but you know, we got a long way. We got some runway in front of us still.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. That's why we funded it now, so you had room. Mr. Serrano.
That's important, by the way.
Yes, sir.
I think to resolve this problem of what to call a mission, just call it J&J, John and Jose, and you'll be all settled. I have no further questions. Just once again to thank you for your service to our country and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'd like to, if I could, talk about, in closing, ask you to focus on the far future, thinking about planning. And we are going to work together to find a way to give you the ability to plan for more than a year at a time and to unleash you and unshackle you as much as we can to allow you to think long term. Because
Redundant?
one of the great things about NASA is that you're one of the few agencies that actually has the ability, one of the few parts of the federal government to look into the far future. Is I think one of the great things that inspires young people. What's over the horizon? What's on that next world? The committee, the Congress has enacted language in the 2018 CGS Appropriations Bill mapping out a 51-year roadmap for the future exploration of space. Obviously, we strongly support that human part. We're going to look closely at and want to visit with you about another conversation. I'll put this on the record and visit with you privately about the cost of the human gateway. I mean, we're looking at a $500 to $600 million additional, an add to the NASA budget for that gateway at the moon, which is, I think, a great idea, but we got to sit down and kind of think that through very carefully. But in addition to that, to help ignite that, restore that magic that Chairman Rogers was talking about that's so important. That's why we included this 51-year roadmap that's designed to begin with the search for life in another world, following the decadal survey. The highest priority mission of the decadal survey last decade was the mission to Europa. The decadal survey asked, are there habitats elsewhere in the solar system with the necessary conditions, organic matter, water, energy, and nutrients to sustain life, and do primitive organisms of any kind live there now? And the consensus of the decadal survey scientists was the best place to look for that was in the ocean world of Europa. So as soon as I became chairman of 15, we also created, Joe, the Ocean Worlds program to direct NASA to focus on those outer, the Enceladus, Titan, Europa, beginning with the Europa mission, to search for life on primitive life forms, because that's the sort of civilization level discovery that's going to ignite renewed passion and magic in the minds of the American people and the world in support of NASA. That's why we enacted it, to ask you to start with that search for life on other worlds, beginning with Europa, and then begin to look for, using WFIRST or whatever next telescope it needs to be, and that's what we're going to talk about on May 9th, identify the nearest Earth-like planet around the nearest star, and using that telescope and star shade technology. This is all enacted into law by Congress. We got it in the 18 bill with strong support of Chairman Shelby. Using star shade and that next telescope to identify the nearest Earth-like planet, fingerprint its atmosphere, looking for the fingerprint of life, carbon dioxide, oxygen, methane, perhaps even industrial pollution. And then we funded, I think, for nuclear thermal, 75 million. We funded this year's 18 bill nuclear thermal propulsion. We've given you the money that you need to develop other types of propulsion, and directed NASA to, at the same time you're searching for that nearest Earth-like planet with that next generation of telescope, to develop interstellar rocket propulsion to go, we hope, no less than 10% of the speed of light, and to launch that mission so that it would be the United States of America that launches humanity's first mission to the nearest Earth-like planet. The first interstellar mission would be launched by the United States no later than 2069, the 100th anniversary of Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon. So that's the 51-year plan that this subcommittee recommended that Congress enacted, with Chairman Shelby's strong support, that I was proud to help put together based on the best recommendations of the decadal survey. So I want to ask you to talk about that. You're going to be putting a report together. That was in our 17 bill. It was also in our 18 bill. So reports due very soon on NASA mapping out that 51-year plan. Could you talk to us about that and begin with discussion of what's necessary and how soon we can get the announcement of opportunity out for the instruments on the lander?
Yeah, so let me see if I can peel that one back. So the 17 report on the propulsion, the interplanetary propulsion, we owe you that, I think, next month, and I believe you will see it next month. I know it's going through review inside the technical teams now, so we should get that. I think we'll have it on time. I can't remember what exactly the due date was.
Interstellar.
Yes, interstellar, I'm sorry. Yeah, not interplanetary, we're already doing that. But the 51-year that we got in the 18, we'll be working on that. We'll get you a report on that. It is the advantage, as I said earlier, is having a longer term goal. We always had, Chairman Rogers said, we went to the moon and we stopped, right? Now we've got a set of stepping stones to move out, frankly, through the universe. So we'll get that report done as well. As far as the lander, the request for instruments for the lander, we're actually looking at maybe a different way than an AO, but we're gonna look at all different kinds of solicitations to actually do it quicker and get things started quicker. So we'll know where we need to do risk reduction, because as you know, that's going to be a tight fit inside that particular activity. We're looking at probably June releasing that, maybe even sooner. So that's what the teams are working on. And we can bring have Dr. Zubook can come up if you need and get an update on what we're thinking from that perspective. Yeah, he is. He's thinking different ways to do these things, and that's important for us. So I think that's where we are on that, because we'd like to get the lander technologies, as much risk reduction as we can, behind us before, so we know if they're going to package well in the spacecraft. Because as you know, that's going to be a challenging spacecraft design, but a fascinating mission. So they all are.
But the one that's most likely to find primitive life
That's what, based on the decadals, for sure, yeah. I will say, as you said, we look to the future, you know, we also look at the past. We look back in time. We're probably the only agency that looks back to the beginning of time and tries to go out into the future as well.
Of course, we're assuming primitive life, but that's your wording. I don't know.
Not sure what we're gonna find in that ocean.
Exactly.
We're gonna see at those nearby Earth-like worlds.
Yep.
I had a chance, if I could, very briefly, you guys will enjoy this story. I met in a briefing at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory last Friday on the Europa mission, on the Mars 2020 mission, all of which are on track, on time. The Mars 2020 mission will be collecting core samples on the surface of Mars and then depositing them in an area where we can go pick it up and return it to Earth with the first samples from another world. That's all come together beautifully. But there's a young engineer named Chad at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, just graduated, just got his master's degree from Caltech, and as in the movie The Martian, where there's some young engineer who figured out the orbital dynamics problem of returning the Mars mission back to rescue in the fictional story to rescue the man stranded on Mars. That actually happens throughout NASA. But this young man is someone I want to make sure to showcase, and we need to recognize him because I think he's a great example of what makes America the greatest country on Earth and how extraordinary a place NASA is to work. There's a young woman from Burma who came here with her family as a young girl with almost no money, and she worked her way through school, graduated from Caltech, and is now designing and heading the design team for the helicopter that will fly on Mars, on the Mars 2020 mission. This young lady from Burma who came to the United States penniless as a 12-year-old girl is heading that up. Nasser Shad, an engineer at JPL, happened to be in his office and overheard a conversation outside his door that the Europa landing team was trying to figure out how to design a transmitter, radio transmitter, solid state, that would survive the intense radiation of Jupiter, survive the super cold temperatures of 70 to 100 degrees Kelvin, survive the super cold temperatures of 70 to 100 degrees Kelvin. He just overheard this conversation in the hallway, and Nasser, that's his specialty. And Nasser came up overnight with a design for a solid-state radio receiver and transmitter that will enable direct-to-Earth transmissions from the surface of Europa. This young man overheard a conversation and came up with it overnight. NASA is full of brilliant, capable scientists, engineers, astronauts, dedicated fiscal experts like your new CFO in the back. So we really appreciate the work that you do, and we want to showcase the work that you do and reignite the passion that all Americans have always had for space exploration, for learning what's on the other side of the mountain, what's on the other side of the hill, and what lies beyond in outer space exploration. So you'll continue to have the support of this committee and the Congress, and we just deeply appreciate your service of 30 years to the people of the United States and to the American space program, to making us the best on Earth. And we're going to do our part to help ensure that, just as President Eisenhower was remembered as the father of the interstate highway system, we'll certainly do our part to help President Trump and Vice President Pence be remembered as the fathers of the interplanetary highway system, and then through this committee, the interstellar highway system. So we really appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Administrator Lightfoot, thank you very much, and we'll have other questions we'll submit for the record as well.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the time, sir. I appreciate you highlighting those two folks, and as you said, I see folks like that every day throughout the entire agency, not just within NASA, but our industry team too. This nation's in pretty good shape with the youth coming up, and they're going to take over one day, and they're a heck of a lot smarter than I am, and it's fun to watch their enthusiasm and passion. And so someday you can come over here and testify. You can do the NASA testimony is what I've determined. You could do it for us. So anyway, but thank you for the time, and I appreciate all the kind words from everybody on the committee. Look forward to watching you guys continue support from the outside.
Thank you. We're going to be moving very quickly on the 19 bill, so we appreciate you coming in.
Europa is also Spanish for Europe. So let's make sure we give proper instructions so they don't make the wrong turn and end up in
Will do.
Spain.
Will do.
Thank you very much, Administrator.
Thank you.
Thank you.